that?
Today we're looking at how the English language is changing. For starters, you've got new pronouns popping up every day, and all of a sudden people can't seem to define what a woman is anymore, as our first clip of the day will show.
Ah boy, here we go.
But first, thank you all for supporting this channel. Feel free to like, share or comment, even if you disagree with my takes. And as always, stick around to the end for the full recap, today's woke news, and much, much more.
What would be your definition of the word woman?
That is a difficult question. I think it depends on one's own perspective. I think it has to do with the current, gender norms.
What is a woman?
I feel like every person has their own definition to that.
What would your definition be?
I mean, if you identify as a woman, then you're a woman.
Incorrect!
Just imagine someone answering the question, what is a car, by saying, something that identifies as a car. These students really should have saved their college tuition.
What is a woman?
A lady someone that does not have a certain private part, I guess. I don't know.
It's not that difficult.
And there you have it. Half these folks are just trying their best to stay politically correct, and the other half genuinely changed the definition of the word woman in their mind to basically mean nothing at all. Likewise, this next woman refuses to use the word mothers because it might not be inclusive enough.
Michael, do you know what the leading cause of death for pregnant people is?
Pregnant people?
Mm-hmm.
Mothers?
If you'd like to call them mothers, not all of them are mothers.
What are they if they're not mothers?
They're pregnant people.
What people other than mothers are pregnant?
It's interesting because you come into this conversation, trying to hold this moral superiority. But when I use inclusive language, which it only takes a couple extra syllables to use inclusive language,
To include
and
who?
it seems to include people who don't identify as women but can become pregnant.
Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Would you personally use the term pregnant people as an alternative to mothers?
You're telling me that in order to be a moral person, I need to accept the idea that a man can really become a woman. That's a prerequisite of my being a moral person.
I mean, yes.
I would
Yes.
like to identify, I do identify actually, as the correct person on this issue. And I would just ask that you accept my identity.
That's not your identity.
That is my identity. I promise you that's my identity. I promise you that.
To me, this is clear proof that inclusive language has gotten way out of control, and it's only going to get worse from here on out, because I guarantee that in a few years' time, we'll be debating whether the term pregnant people is inclusive enough for people who don't identify as humans. And sticking on the subject of words being changed over time to be more accommodative, this next lady explains why she is against the word pedophile.
Folks, my name is Miranda. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a licensed professional counselor and sex therapist in Erie, Pennsylvania. And today I want to talk about minor attracted persons. And I want to talk about minor attracted persons because they are probably the most vilified population of folks in our culture. And most folks are making incorrect assumptions about them without actually knowing much about them. You may have noticed that I'm using the term minor attracted persons, sometimes abbreviated to MAPS, instead of the more commonly used term pedophile. And I'm doing this because the term pedophile has moved from being a diagnostic label to being a judgmental, hurtful insult that we hurl at people in order to harm them or slander them.
Officer, right there.
Now, the craziest thing to me is that she's a licensed therapist, which means people with trust issues trying to seek out therapy might actually wind up in her mentally unstable hands. And it's even crazier that so many people like this therapist don't seem to care about protecting children, as much as the adults that are inflicting harm on them. But moving right along, these next two clips reminds us that the English language isn't just seeing a cancellation of certain words, it's also promoting a new set of inclusive terms, especially when it comes to pronouns.
My pronouns. So of course we have he, him, his, himself, and they, them, theirs, themselves. And then we also have void, void self, end, ender, enders, and ender self. Death, deaths, death self. Pix, pixel, pickles, pix, pixel, pixels, pixel self. Vial, vials, vial self.
My name is Diddy. And I'm non-binary. My pronouns pronouns are she, they, that I'm queer. And this is me officially coming out. Oh my god.
Oh, do you know something?
Now, for someone who seems so enlightened about her own identity, this woman does not seem like a mentally stable individual. My first instinct was that all this crying and hysteric laughing was just an attempt from her to get people talking about how brave she is. But nothing beats the stupidity of the first girl, who will hopefully realize someday just how stupid she sounds. Because if most of your pronouns sound like Minecraft items, and you have to literally read them off a list to remember, then you're probably better off sticking to the basics. But what can you expect in a world that caters its language to a vocal minority? That brings us to our penultimate clip, featuring a trans comedian who argues that cis people should relate to her material instead of the other way round.
I'm a trans comedian and people always tell me, you just gotta find a way to relate to cis audiences. Okay, but what if I'm like, a lot cooler than them though? I'm in an 8-person all-trans polycule in Los Angeles. I write for TV and America thinks I'm the devil. How about they try to relate to me?
But no.
Imagine being mediocre at comedy, then blaming the audience. Forcing others to relate to your material is pretty much the same as forcing people to use your preferred pronouns or language. It might work on some, but it's not going to work on all. And on that note, our final clip of the day is brought to you by a particularly passionate trans rights activist who decides that screaming is a far better method of communication altogether than using her words.
So, I am going to spend the next minute screaming, because that is what is going on in here. That is what the trans genocide in this country, in this city, has brought me to.
Now, firstly, I'd like to apologise to everyone wearing earphones. And when did people start using the word genocide so loosely? There's nothing close to that going on for trans people in her country. So even without the screaming, I don't think this is a person capable of speaking any sense. And before I summarise my takeaways from all the clips we saw today, let me give you one more example of the woke mob policing our language. So Scotland's International Development Alliance, or CIDA, is a taxpayer-funded government aid group, and they generated a lot of chatter on the internet last week when they released a guide on anti-oppressive language. And you can probably guess what comes next. The guide tells its readers to ditch any words that might be gendered or oppressive. So for some examples, saying things like the developing world or first or third world country is considered hierarchical and exploitative, and we should be saying things like majority world or minority country instead. Meanwhile, words like aid or foreign aid are problematic because, to quote CIDA, they deny the unjust distribution of resources, which makes aid necessary, and so they prefer the term global redistribution instead. There's a lot more I haven't covered, like saying climate crisis instead of climate change, but you get the gist of it. It goes back to my original point earlier about our language changing. It's not so much that the language itself is changing, but how people are enforcing its usage as a political weapon. Think back to college students who were scared to define what a woman is, or insistent on using the term pregnant people instead of mothers. That's either because they've had the threat of being cancelled ingrained in their head, or they've been indoctrinated to the point where everything is fluid and words don't have any meaning anymore. And that's also why you get nonsensical pronouns popping up every day, and much more alarmingly, people masking words like pedophile under euphemisms like minor attracted persons. There are countless ways in which language shapes our culture and everyday life, and it increasingly looks like the progressives are driving the change. But as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next week.